and 140 guests. The newly titled Princess Rajwa chose a modern gown by a Lebanese designer. Do stay with us here on BBC News or go to the BBC News app. You can get it on your smartphone or tablet. I'm Gareth Barlow. Thanks so much for watching.
As fighting continues in Ukraine, join our team for the latest developments.
There's now a massive effort to rebuild what's been destroyed, but what happened here will never be forgotten.
See the headlines as they happen with breaking news alerts in the app and get the full story with bbc.com/news. Follow the story for all the latest with BBC News.
Live from London, this is BBC News. The US Senate passes the debt ceiling, sending it to President Biden for signing. This means the US will not be defaulting on its debt. Ending plastic pollution, we check in on the progress of the Global Plastic Treaty. And the cannabis market is booming, yet it's a tough space to be in. We look at why. Hi there, I'm Victoria Valentine. The US Congress has approved a deal to lift the country's borrowing limit. The bipartisan measure sped through the Senate by a vote of 63 to 36, a day after it cleared the US House of Representatives. President Joe Biden has said he will enact the measure into law. The signature on the bill will spare the United States from a catastrophic default on its $31.4 trillion debt. Will McDonough is the CEO and lead portfolio manager at EMG Advisors. And I asked him if it was a little bit of a squeaky bum time for him.
Not at all. It was sad, actually. You know, they've politicized everything in today's day and age. I think Wall Street has known that they're going to get this thing done. There's just been a lot of posturing, a lot of people claiming success, and just a lot of hullabaloo that was unnecessary. And it's embarrassing, actually, as an American, to see them gamify it in that way. We just need to get back to business. We need to get back to growth, and we need to stop with this posturing.
That's interesting that you said that. Let's talk about the perception of the US abroad. I mean, how do you feel that the US is currently portrayed in terms of its status and its power elsewhere?
Well, could you imagine that the US would want to cast doubt into the international markets about its stability and about its debt? I mean, how stupid is that? In today's day and age, when we have, rising issues with China, when we have, OPEC meeting this weekend and gamifying those systems, and the U.S. wants to politicize its own debt and call into question its own capacity to meet its responsibilities, it's sad and it's short-sighted, and I'm embarrassed, as I said, that they did it that way. But the reality of it is, I think the globe knows that the United States is sound. It's a strong place for business. The U.S. dollar is still, the reserve currency of the world, whether the Chinese like that or not. And we need to just persist.
Yeah, and they certainly don't like it, actually. But to be fair, Will, it's not as though President Biden was doing that. He said, in fact, very little about this debt ceiling in the weeks in the negotiations and stuff. In fact, actually, a lot of his focus and his comments are actually international. It's to do with foreign policy and the US's place in the world.
Yeah, and he needs to grow that. Part of the critiques about his presidency has been, not being able to do that. And so he needs to step out of the way a little bit for the House of Representatives and Congress and the Senate to be able to do things like the debt limit, and he will sign it. And then tomorrow night, Eastern time, he's going to take a victory lap as if he did do it. But in reality, they've made the decision to distance himself from it until it's been successful, and then he'll reintroduce himself and sign the fancy paperwork and hold it up for everyone to see as if he's the hero.
The United States and Taiwan have just signed a new trade agreement meant to strengthen the economic and trade relationship between the two countries. Of course, both have trade and political tensions with China. Now, this move sparked a warning, as you might imagine, from Beijing, which considers Taiwan, part of Chinese territory. Samir Hussain has all the details.
Trade between the United States and Taiwan amounts to about $75 billion a year. That number is dwarfed by China's trade with Taiwan, which stands at a massive $120 billion a year. By signing this trade deal, the U.S. is looking to build its presence in Asia and to rival China. Taiwan, for its part, is looking to reduce its economic dependence on China, especially in light of the geopolitical tensions between it and Beijing. Unsurprisingly, China did not react well, saying the United States should stop any form of official exchanges with Taiwan under the guise of trade. Now, Beijing has stepped up threats and rhetoric against Taiwan in recent years, increasing military drills in the seas around the island and working to cut off its official ties with countries around the world. Discussions between Washington and Taipei began in August of last year. This current agreement covers issues like customs with regard to trade, anti-corruption measures, and investment opportunities for small and medium-sized enterprises.
Plastic pollution is a major environmental problem. Every year, millions of tons of plastic waste end up in the environment, where it can harm wildlife, pollute waterways and contribute to climate change. Now, the Global Plastics Treaty is being negotiated by the United Nations Environment Assembly at the moment in Paris, and it's expected to be finalised by the end of 2024. This treaty is seen as a pretty major opportunity to address plastic pollution and the crisis there. It's expected to look at things like the full life cycle of plastic, from production all the way to disposal, and things in the middle as well, improving recycling. Dr. Deborah Brosnan runs an environmental consultancy, and I asked her why we have to wait until 2024 to get a treaty done on the problem.
That's a really good point. We've known for years. I think what's been happening is that the problem has gotten worse and worse. So we're actually seeing literally plastic waste on the ground wherever we're traveling. And now the data are becoming clear that plastic is a climate risk, it's a biodiversity risk, and it's a human health risk. So all of a sudden, nations around the world are seeing that we've got to do something. And we're coming into this treaty with enormous positivity.
Now, I've done a little bit of work on this myself, in fact, and I actually went to some islands off the coast of Canada where there was a whole tide of plastic that had washed up from Japan. And this just goes to the point that pollution in one country travels. There are no national boundaries as such across the ocean. So do you think that this treaty is going to be taken seriously by every country? Will there be things like penalties imposed on those who don't follow the accord?
Oh, I think so. And it's exactly what you said. This is a global problem. The sort of plastic waste we're seeing in the Arctic doesn't come from the Arctic. It comes from other parts of the world, and it's floating across the oceans. So, yes, this will be taken seriously by nations. It'll be taken seriously by communities. And what we're seeing in the treaty, two things. One is, what does the treaty cover? But the second part, equally as important, is how will this be enforced? Will there be incentives? Will there be, for instance, taxes on the producers of plastic? Will we have eco standards? So yes, we're going to start to see a combination of incentives and penalties.
Now, Dr. Brosnan, all these things are always a compromise, aren't they? I mean, we've sort of, in weird ways, we've seen this with the US debt ceiling deal. It takes bipartisanship, at least for the United States. We need every country to be involved in this. If there was one single thing that could not be compromised on, what would it be? One thing that desperately needs to be in this accord?
I think that what desperately needs to be in this accord is that we stop single-use plastics, because half of the plastics produced today are single-use, which means they're used once and then they go into waste. They're the kind of plastic you see wash up on beaches and drains. So the number one thing we cannot compromise on is to stop single-use plastics. It can be done. It can be done easily.
Let's get some of the day's other news now, starting in Sri Lanka. The country has cut its interest rate by a huge 2.5 percentage points. It's the first cut in 3 years, something that the government says is a sign that the economy is finally starting to recover from a crippling economic crisis. Interest rates had been raised to record levels in an effort to quell inflation. And now to Elon Musk, now back from China. He is now, however, being accused of insider trading by investors who lost billions by trading the cryptocurrency Dogecoin. In a filing to a federal court in Manhattan, a group of investors alleged that he used Twitter posts, paid online influencers, and even used an appearance on the TV show Saturday Night Live to boost the value of the cryptocurrency before selling $124 million worth. A lawyer for Musk and Tesla declined to comment. Turkey's President Erdogan is to be sworn in for a further term on Saturday following last week's runoff. He's also expected to announce a new cabinet. Now, Erdogan's third term as president comes at a significant time of challenge for Turkey. The country is facing a refugee crisis, a growing threat from terrorism. There's also an economic crisis as well. Inflation has fallen sharply, official inflation, in recent months, but it's still well over 40%. Erdogan has promised to address these challenges and to lead Turkey into a new era of prosperity and security. Well, let's speak now to Ibrahim Dogos, who is the director of the Centre for Turkey Studies. These are lofty ambitions. Do you think he has any chance? Let's just deal with the economic system first. Unless he changes the course of his current strategy vis-à-vis fiscal and monetary policy, does he have any chance of leading this nation to prosperity?
Hi, Victoria. I mean, you're right. Turkey has been going through a difficult period of time economically. Since 2018, the country's currency has been losing its value constantly against dollar. And yet, even yesterday, it has gone further down. Now it's at 20 lira is equal to $1. So President Erdogan has to change his course. I mean, his course, if he wants to succeed and provide prosperity, and if he wants to have a thriving economy, he has to change his course. And we are beginning to hear signs of him trying to find a way to do that. The main problem with President Erdogan is, I would say, that he keeps his word. Even if he makes a mistake, he sticks with his mistake. He doesn't budge quite easily. He doesn't really show any flexibility in changing his policies quite often. But today, after the new parliament being sworn in, we're expecting to hear about the new cabinet. And the signs are that he's trying really hard to bring back the former cabinet member, Mehmet Şimşek, who was in charge of economy, monetary policies and fiscal policies. If Mehmet Şimşek is brought back into the heart of government, and if he's given a freedom to run the economy in a way that he thinks is best for the country, and if President Erdogan stops intervening in economical policies, I think we will start seeing an improvement in the economy in the country.
That's really interesting. So you think rather than go back on his word, he doesn't utter anymore. So he leaves it to a different minister to make up economic policy. Is that the way forward for Turkey, you think?
That's the only way for things to get back to normal, I think, in terms of economical policies. Mr. Şimşek used to work with Mr. Erdogan, so they're known to each other quite well. And under Mr. Şimşek and Mr. Babacan, who's no longer in President Erdogan's political party, they both were running a very successful economy for years in Turkey. So now the only way is to go back to normal economical policies, orthodox economical policies, where he needs to raise interest rate to control inflation. The country is suffering. Cost of living is terrible in this country at the moment because last year's annual inflation was at 80%. I mean, 80% inflation is unacceptable. It would not work for any country. So it's quite challenging and tough.
But it has, however, since then halved, I think. It looks like, Ibrahim, it looks like you have to go. It looks like someone might be about to join us on camera. Yeah. Ibrahim Dogos, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Victoria. Thank you for having me, Victoria. Thank you.
What a nice guy. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
The most exhilarating racing series in sailing comes to an epic conclusion, with 9 teams putting everything on the line in an adrenaline-fueled end to the season. The Spirit of Yachting transports you to stunning destinations for this spectacle of speed and skill, as the Sail GP Season 3 champion is crowned. The Spirit of Yachting on BBC News.
I think we can use a form of capitalism and continue to get its benefits while solving climate change.
We should remember that the globalization we had before brought more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
I always associated fashion with fun and joy.
Women ourselves are finding our power. We always had a voice. We just weren't allowed to use it.
When big names talk, they talk to the BBC.
You're live with BBC News. Now let's go underground because China's scientists have begun drilling a 10,000-metre hole into the Earth's crust. The drilling is expected to take 457 days. But why? Why are they doing this? Nick Marsh thinks he might know the answer.
I don't have the exact answer, unfortunately, Victoria. I mean, what we do know is that there's plenty of oil in Xinjiang province. It's way out in sort of the western reaches of China. It's a really economically important region for the country. It's deep earth exploration, I suppose. So that could include looking for oil, but also, who knows, they could find minerals, natural resources. There's also a lot of scientific experimentation as well that, you know, could be on the cards as part of this project. But yeah, this hole into the earth, it's huge. It's going to be 11,000 meters long. It's going to go through 10 continental strata. It's going to hit the crustaceous system. One member of the technical team, he's been quoted in Chinese state media, he says the operation is like driving a big truck on 2 steel cables. So it's not going to be easy, but the aim is to expand the boundaries of human understanding. It's going to take about 450 days to do. It's not going to be done overnight, but it's interesting actually that it happens just after China sent its first civilian astronaut into space from another desert, from the Gobi Desert. Xi Jinping has been talking a lot about exploring new frontiers. There's been talk of a human mission to the moon as well. So new frontiers in the sky, but also below Earth as well. And this seems to be part of that.
Lord John Browne, who used to run BP, said that if he was running a major oil company again, he would probably pull the company out of Uganda following new anti-gay laws which were introduced in the country. They include the death penalty. Uganda has generous but underdeveloped oil reserves, and Lord Browne said he couldn't talk for the company, but he'd certainly be considering stopping operations there if it was up to him.
I do think it's completely wrong what Uganda's done. It's a bad example. It's a bad set of laws, and it defies any view people have of the right handling of human rights. Totally wrong. So I think if I were in business there, I would have to consider my position and actually make sure first my team was safe, and secondly ask myself why I should be doing business there.
Yeah.
And probably pull out.
Right, so, okay, let's just be clear, because if you were the boss of an oil major today, you quite possibly you'd boycott Uganda.
But I think you have to be careful. You have to look to see what you can, the status in all the countries that you operate in. There are plenty of things going on that you have to ask yourself, can I be there and help change it? Or am I there in the face of things changing in the wrong direction?
Right, no.
And there, I think you have to make judgments. There's nothing black and white about anything like this that's full of ambiguity. And I think you've got to make good, balanced judgments.
And you can see the full interview with Lord Browne on Talking Business Weekly with Aaron Hazelhurst this weekend. Let's end on a high, shall we? The cannabis industry in the United States is growing fast in terms of revenues and new markets opening up. The Cannabis World Congress and Business Expo, it's a business trade show for the legalized cannabis industry, has been taking place all this week.
It's a complicated picture. So overall stocks in the sector are down more than 90% on their 2021 peak. While, as you say, revenues and new markets are growing rapidly. I think there was a lot of cheap money sloshing around in 2021, and there was more optimism about federal reform. The sector still faces some regulatory headwinds, over competition, high taxation, and as a result, it's very challenging for these businesses to exit to larger multinational corporations. That means that they're struggling to receive the levels of funding that they need to grow to the next phase. And even though revenues and new markets are growing rapidly, the actual share price of these companies is declining, and their ability to borrow and raise funds is hampered significantly.
So these companies appear to be selling a lot of weed, but not very many shares. Is that the overall picture?
That's exactly it, which is the inverse of the problem in the early days when there was a hype in the cannabis sector in 2018 and everyone was selling a lot of shares and not very much cannabis. But there have been two kind of booms, peaks in the cannabis industry, and there are a lot of frustrated, exhausted investors, and there are a lot of challenges still in rolling this out. While there was a lot of optimism in 2018 and 2021, we're in a bit of a trough. But stocks are very cheap now, and it looks like we're near, if not at, the bottom of the market.
Now, my understanding is that about 90% of the cannabis market is in North America, so the US and Canada combined. You're a consultancy advising Europe. What is the rationale behind there? Do you see a big boom coming to Europe?
We have a lot of reform in plans across Europe. So a range of different European countries are trying to reform, including most notably Germany. But their regulations, proposed regulations, have been watered down a number of times. There are EU issues with the legalization of cannabis and the challenges that presents to EU law and policy. And as a result, it's somewhat harder to create a legal cannabis market for non-medical use in Europe, and it's slower, the reform. So we're seeing growing medical markets, growing decriminalization, growing access all round, but it's harder to build taxable, fully legal markets in Europe. And Germany, Czech Republic and Netherlands and others are all trying to do that at the moment, but with little success.
It's been a pleasure. Do stay with us here on BBC News. We've got Gareth Barlow waiting in the wings to bring you headlines. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.